Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel McNair, and I am so happy to be here. I'm a whole being athlete ambassador. And other than that, I'm a former basketball player from George Mason University, and I'm excited to be here with Samuel, Allison, Hannah to talk about life after sports. So I'm going to kick it to Samuel. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. Yeah. So, like you said, I'm another one of the whole being athlete ambassadors. I am a former St. Bonaventure Bonnies baseball player, so keeping it in the A10 with George Mason as well.
Yay!
Yeah. So, yeah, happy to be here. Talk about transitioning out of sports. Next up, I think we'll go to Allison.
Yes, hi, I'm Allison. I am a co-founder with Hannah of Ehrhart Singer Therapy Group. We are a therapy group that serves collegiate and professional athletes in the greater Boston area. And we are so excited to be here. I'm a former swimmer at Lemoyne College, and I'll kick it over to Hannah so she can introduce herself as well.
Yeah, Allison did a good job saying who I am professionally. I will say athletically, I am a former diver at Northwestern University.
We're very excited to be here because this is such an important discussion to be having. So Hannah and I focus a lot on athletes that are currently in their sport, but we're noticing that our work is shifting a bit more to specifically focus on the folks that are transitioning out of their sport due to graduation, retirement, injury, and that kind of a thing. And we're noticing that there's a gap in mental health treatment for this specific population. And it's kind of a time when athletes really need therapeutic supports the most. So we're thrilled to be here to kind of raise awareness as to how we can gain access to the supports, what those supports could look like, and all of that great stuff. So yeah, let's get started.
I'll jump right in with the first question. So I'm actually going to ask Samuel and Rachel, what is the transition from playing to not playing actually like, and what was that experience for you guys?
Sure. So, I guess I can start with this one. So, for me, it's probably going to be different than a lot of other people. I am in med school right now. So for me, I went right to med school right afterwards. So kind of kept that structure of going to class and then, having whatever else to do in the evening. But for me, I think that was some of the problem was that it was so similar to when I was in undergrad that, my lectures got done at maybe 4 o'clock and I was like, all right, now what do I do? There's no practice anymore. There's no games to go to. There's nothing to really prep for. There's no workout. It's go home and study, and then what do I do? And so my reaction to that was to just keep planning things and keep planning things so that it was so structured and regimented. And I tried to keep it so much like I was still an undergrad, still playing baseball. Um, so when it was that, it just felt like my life was just so regimented for the first probably 6 months afterwards. And it was really strange. Like I think the only thing that really was similar was I would go work out every day because I was like, I feel like I have to go work out. But other than that, it was kind of like, all right, when's baseball season going to start again? And it obviously never did.
Yeah.
Um, my transition out of sports, it hurt. It really hurt. Coming there on senior day, getting my jersey and that last game and stepping off the court and being like, wow, I'm not going to go pro, but how do I stay around the game in some capacity? So for me, that was my comfort. I decided to get my master's in sports journalism and stay in some capacity around basketball, sports life. Went to work at ESPN and CBS Sports. So that was kind of my comfort zone of transitioning out of physically playing sports. So it was more of a comfort of still being on a busy schedule and still using that athlete mentality of being organized and working within a team and stuff like that. But I just wasn't physically playing. So my transition, I wouldn't say it was, it would suck when I was covering like college basketball and they're like, "Oh, George Mason's gonna be, playing," and I'm like, "Oh man, I miss playing." And coincidentally, actually, I covered one of the game, I covered a women's George Mason game. So it was funny because they got like a video of me in the truck covering it because I was a graphics producer at the time. And the same coach I was coached by was the coach. So it was a full circle moment. So transition was sad and everything, but I feel like, you know, I'm sure Samuel and everyone on here knows, as an athlete, you just take those characteristics in anything that you do. So.
Yeah, and then one thing I wanted to add on that too is, I mean, maybe Allison and Hannah, you can add on this too. But so for me, I was a spring sport athlete, so I went right from season done into med school. How was it like still being in college and then having like another semester or however long it was when you weren't an athlete anymore? I guess it was done.
Rachel, I'm curious your experience. I got injured, so my time was cut short.
Yes,
which is
as
a
did I.
different experience in its own. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I guess for me, it was just to see everyone else being able to like play their sports, and I was just in school. I'll say I didn't have as much to do. But to speak to Samuel's point, I will say that even though I went after I graduated from George Mason and I had another semester of like doing nothing, I was prepping for grad school, which I totally regret going straight through. I'm sure med school is a whole nother story, but after I was like burnt out. I was like 6.5 years of school. I can't do this. So I can only imagine, Samuel, more power to you.
Thanks. Yeah.
I think that's such an interesting point, though, of like finding that thing to fill what sport filled for you and how common it is for an athlete to just kind of keep going because that structure is what's familiar. And I can speak from my experience, like getting injured. It was freshman year. Everyone knows there's enough going on freshman year without getting injured. And then losing my sport, I ended up developing an eating disorder to kind of fill the void because I needed that structure and I didn't have any external way to do that as a college student who wasn't an athlete anymore after like 18 practices a week in high school. So I also just want to completely validate that that's a personal as well as professional experience that we're seeing of athletes just not really knowing where to put their energy when their sport is over and feeling very, very lost.
Absolutely. I mean, that resonates with me because I too was injured my first year. And so I wasn't able to continue. And I remember coming out of it thinking like, oh my gosh, like what do I do now? You know, and bounced around. I think for the rest of my 3 years on campus, I probably held 5 or 6 different jobs, like campus jobs. Just, you know, I was like a tour guide and an RA, and you know, I was the sculpture model at one point where I was just like sitting there, you know, and people were, you know, sculpting. I mean, it was just the strangest of things because, as you were talking about, Rachel, you know, we kind of develop these mentalities, right? And in our sport, and they serve us super well while we're there. And sometimes when we come out to the other side of it, we're looking to kind of put the other side back into those mentalities. And it can be tricky. It can be tricky. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. The reason why I even started thinking about life after sports in general was because I had back-to-back ACL surgeries on my knees, and like we're like, there's no way she's gonna come back from that. You know, I was able to come back and play my senior year, but it was tough. I mean, you know, just dealing with like, okay, this isn't gonna work out. If this doesn't work out, what do I do? I've put all my work and all my like talent and stuff into playing basketball. What do I do? And it's like kind of trying to, I know this is getting into something different, but it's like knowing your identity outside of sports and learning that to kind of facilitate. So it was just kind of hard to see that reality of like, okay, wow, I can't do this for the rest of my life.
Absolutely. No, I think, and in some ways that is a great bridge, I think, maybe into the next question we can explore. So, you know, for folks who are watching this and are, you know, recognizing that an ending might be coming up from them for them soon, you know, I'm curious to hear what folks have to say about, you know, what their experience was like as they were transitioning out. Specifically, you know, what feelings were coming up for people, what kinds of thoughts and feelings were coming up in that transition.
Yeah, so for me, I think a lot of it was just like anxiety about not having anything around anymore in the evening to kind of fill my time, I guess I would say.
Mhm.
And I guess I kind of felt like an emptiness too, like that I needed to fill it with something. I couldn't just sit and relax or watch TV or do whatever else it was that I wanted to. But I will say also, because this is obviously something that I'm very passionate about, I've done some research with former NFL players and former college football players as well. And each of them kind of has their own story about their own transition out of sports, and it's different for everyone. So each individual have their own kind of experience about it. So I may say that, I kind of had this emptiness, and some people may feel like they had a relief if it was really burdensome for them. So it is different for every person.
Mhm.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Everyone's experience is gonna be different. For me, I mean, it was bittersweet because it was like, wow, I finished this chapter, but now I'm heading into a new one and really kind of that uncertainty of
Mhm.
how it's gonna go and
Mhm.
is my purpose gonna be as big as it was on the team, or am I gonna I'm gonna be a small fish in a big sea again?
Mhm.
Like, how do I distinguish myself? I feel like as athletes, we
Mhm.
always find ways to kind of distinguish ourselves in a sport and, perfecting it so that we can try to be the best that we can be. So as I was transitioning to grad school, in my case, after my undergraduate degree, I was like, okay, I'm learning something totally new.
Mhm.
How do I go about this? No one knows me. How do I make a path out of this? How do I do it? So it's definitely that uncertainty, but I just like anything else, as you continue to do it, as you meet more people and learn more about the new journey and new chapter that you're in, you'll start to balance out. Just like as it was when you first started being an athlete, we didn't, you guys didn't start being really, really good the first day. It took time. So as I've been able to do that, it helped me transition. So I know there's always that worry, and people are like, "No, I'm gonna go pro," but you sometimes have to be realistic with yourself. You gotta think about that life after sports.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you guys feel ready to be done?
I think I was ready in a certain sense of I knew it was coming. I had kind of prepared myself. I was ready to start my journey in med school, or at least I thought I was, to go ahead and do that. Um, and I guess for me, like, I always had that as like my backup plan. And so it was just like my backup plan is kind of coming to fruition.
Mhm.
Um, I definitely would have liked to stay another year and been around everyone and keep playing, but I think I was as ready as I ever would be.
Mhm.
Um, wait, what was the question? I
If
totally
you felt ready.
Oh,
Yeah.
I feel ready. Oh, yes, yes, yes. Okay. Did I feel ready? Whew. No, I don't think you're ever ready. I feel like you think about it all the time, and you're like until it really comes and you're like, "Wow, I really don't have practice. I really don't have to get
Mhm.
up." And
Mhm.
I had, like, classmen that I was really close with, and they still had practice. They had still had spring workouts. So it was like, "Hey, I can't hang out. I can't do this." And I'm like, "Alright, I'll go to the gym." But I think a little bit for me for me, my transition since I played, sports, and then I also had the, like, career in sports, I feel like it seemed a little smoother just because I really wasn't technically out of the fast-paced lifestyle.
Mhm. Mhm.
I think now, though, because I've stopped working at, CBS Sports, was blessed to win 2 Emmys, which you guys can see over there. Um,
Yeah, that's awesome.
Congrats.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
um
awesome.
Yes.
but
That's
I
great.
think it's hit me a little bit more now because
Mhm.
I'm, like,
Mhm.
15 months out of working in sports. So, like, I have no association with sports except for Athletes for Hope, of course. Um,
Yes.
but I think it's hit me harder now because it's like I still have a lot of my friends are in sports, and they're like, "Oh, do you know what's going on with this? Do you know what's going on with that?" And I'm like, "No." So I think
Mhm.
it was harder for me to transition out of working in sports than it actually was from me playing. It hit me a lot harder because I was like, wow, I've only known like sports career, and everyone's like, how are you going to get a job outside of sports? That's all you know. And I was blessed to be able to do that, but it definitely did take a lot of confidence, because it's something I've always been around. So I feel like I feel it now more than I did finish playing.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good point. And it actually, I think, goes a little bit back to what Samuel was saying when he was talking about how each person has a very individualized reaction and response to the other side. And I think a great way to highlight that is, my experience was actually like almost the complete opposite of yours, Rachel. Whereas, I left my sport, it was due to injury. It was not really by choice or on good terms. And so my reaction in response to that was, I want nothing to do with swimming ever again. Like, I don't want to be around my teammates. I don't want to be reminded of what it was like while I was there and was having a hard time. I don't want to smell the chlorine. I don't want to be in the bathing suit. Like, I had a very almost visceral response to it. And I mean, no joke, like to this day, I really don't go swimming in pools. Like I really don't. And so I think it's a kind of fascinating dynamic that goes on that just, makes me just want to kind of say something like, hey, you know what, whatever it is that you're feeling right now, it's okay. It's yours. You own that, right? We're all coming at this from a very specific and personal way. And there's going to be a whole host of emotions that can come up, a whole range. And wherever you are in that's yours. And you can own that.
Yeah, I'll own the fact that I'm kind of jealous of you guys. I am always jealous of people who got to do 4 years in college. And my own reaction to it was I got injured. I was recruited on potential. It was something I was really reaching for. And I took it out on myself. I was very hard on myself. I should have just gone D3. I should have done something comfortable. This was my fault. I stole those 4 years from myself. And that's why I'm never ready to give up. And so part of my professional work, I think, is also like personal healing of, you're never really ready. What was your fun fact? I was a diver. Like, there was no other thing about me. That was who I was. That was everything. I didn't know hobbies. That was it. And so it's really interesting to talk to two people who did get to kind of graduate out of the sport, and through our professional work, talking to people who have graduated out or get injured, and just seeing that there are so many similarities, even when there are pretty fundamental differences to people's experiences.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I think kind of going off of that too, with your professional work, it kind of leads us into the next question of like, for me, I was lucky. My wife is a counselor as well. So I have the blessing of, having her there to kind of help me through a bunch of stuff as well. And you guys kind of have the same thing, being social workers, what kind of like resources, someone who doesn't have someone in the mental health field, what kind of resources are there for people who transition out of sports?
Yeah, I think the first thing, we're going to give very therapist-y answers. I'm just going to put that disclaimer on it, which means like kind of giving advice without totally giving advice. Like, the first thing is acknowledging that it's a big deal. Like, I think athletes, particularly athletes who have done all 4 years and kind of are like, I graduated, I did my thing, I should kind of be over it. There's a lot of shoulds that come up with athletes, and mental toughness of, this shouldn't be a big deal, I'm just going to move on. So I think the biggest thing is being a part of this conversation, honestly, and acknowledging that it is hard and it is an identity, and to lose it is no small feat. On a more practical level, I think reaching out to community athletes, particularly athletes at high levels, are used to being absolutely surrounded by support. And so they have their coaches, they have their teammates, they have their trainers, they might have sports psych people, like whoever it is on that team. And then to be done and not have that anymore can feel incredibly isolating and lonely. So I think for people to reach out to, if they're lucky enough to have teammates who graduated with them or who have had a similar experience, just normalizing the fact that this is happening for them is so incredibly important, because mental illness and mental struggles thrive in isolation. And so if you can find your community, that's amazing. That could be family too, but just really finding people who know what's going on for you and connecting with them. I think when Allison and I were talking about this, just feels like the most important thing. Allison, do you have things to add?
No, I think that very much covers it. I think, you know, the other thing that kind of came to mind as you were talking, Hannah, was a bit about like play and the importance of finding play in our life. You know, sport is a way that we felt very playful for a very long period of time. And I think, you know, when we leave that, we are also saying goodbye to spaces where we got to be creative and we got to use our minds and our bodies, and we got to be in union with other people and communion with other people. And I think a really great resource and tool is to kind of check back in with yourself and like, what kinds of things can I do to stay playful right now? You know, what kind of hobbies, or what, you know, what have I always wanted to try that I never had the opportunity to, or, you know, what's something different that I maybe could be interested in, right? Allowing yourself to explore and be willing to get curious again, I think is a really great, it's a great opportunity there.
Yeah. And I think the other thing, I mean, the obvious answer is therapy, right? Like, I think knowing that if you are struggling, reaching out to those supports, trying to find play. I think athletes, there's a lot of really wonderful qualities you learn by being a top athlete. And sometimes when you're not an athlete, they can kind of bite you in the butt. So like, if you're trying to play and you can only do all or nothing, and it just doesn't feel right to play the sport you once loved because you're not doing it at the caliber that you were once doing it, like knowing that that's really normal and it's okay to ask for help. Or if you're feeling really lost and not having structure, just knowing that that's also something that trained professionals could help with, and it's okay to ask for help.
I just have another separate question. So do you guys feel that there has been a notion around, I guess, therapy, that makes you feel like, oh, there's something wrong with you if you go? Or the reason why I say that is me being transparent. Like when I tore both my ACLs, and I didn't really realize I was depressed until like my mom was like, Rachel, why haven't you eaten? Why are you not doing this? Why are you not doing that? Oh my God, you lost so much weight. Like, why? And I'm like, I can't play. I don't know why this is happening to me. And at the time, it was like, people would be like, oh, just go talk to someone. But they would make it seem like it was like this notion of like making it seem like something was wrong with me. And I learned later on that that wasn't the case. But I guess in the athletic area, how do we get rid of that notion? Or maybe it's changed. I mean, I'm like 8 years out. Maybe it's changed. But I feel like there was a notion around that made it seem like, oh, if I go talk to the team psychiatrist, something's wrong with me. Like someone's going to say something, or people are going to talk about me because I'm going through this.
Yes. Thank you a million times for asking that question. It's such a big one. And we actually talk a lot about kind of this dynamic that you're bringing up right now in the first discussion. So it was like therapy FAQs. And so some of the questions that they were asking me, you know, were just like this. And yes, right, there is a serious stigma that exists within the athlete community. It's significant. And I think in a lot of ways, part of where that stigma really comes from is we have this social, societal narrative that athletes are supposed to be tough, right? They are supposed to be strong, right? So feeling any type of weakness or showing any type of weakness, right, indicates all kinds of things. And there's a lot of stigma around saying, hey, look, you know what? I do need some help right now. And your question of what do we do? Like, how do we combat that, right? We talk about it. We have conversations like this. We normalize that mental health is a significant struggle for athletes. Sometimes, in some cases, athletes in particular, right? They have an increased risk for mental health issues, some specific ones, you know? And so I think, you know, we've got to educate a community. We've got to break down the barriers. We need to start talking and normalizing, you know, getting mental health supports and taking a look at the numbers, right? I mean, the numbers are staggering. of how many people would report how many athletes would report that they're experiencing anxiety or depression. They're staggering.
I also think these conversations are such a huge step to that, because one thing that we've found as we've been talking with a bunch of people and talking with our clients is that it's the athletes that want this, but it's the systemic issues that can get in the way. So like in certain sports, if there's a certain, like I'm thinking of crew, if there's a certain number of spots in the boat, your teammates are going to be really supportive of the fact that you need this help, but maybe if your coach catches light of it, they might not put you in the boat, or there's a fear that they won't put you in the boat. So I think there's also like having these conversations and helping to normalize it, which is happening. But the more we can talk about this, I think the better, because there are so many systemic issues that hold athletes back, and they're real. Like, you want playing time. And if you're not going to get playing time because you're struggling with depression, you're going to suppress it, which is going to make your depression worse, which is putting us in the situation that we are in with the NCAA right now. So like, we need to be talking about this so that these systemic issues are changing and people can have these conversations without fearing repercussions. And unfortunately, we're a ways away from that, but just knowing that like what you're doing is normal. And that's why I'm so big on community, is like, if you know you're not alone, you're more likely to talk about it, because you can't not play a whole team. Like, that's not an option.
Right. And I think another piece of it too, right, is starting to kind of get super clear about language. You know, what kinds of language are we using in this community, right? Is it language that's raising people up, or is it language that's kind of putting us down, right? And so, you know, one of the things I talk about a lot is the difference between, you know, mental skills and mental health. Right. And just because a team might be offering mental skills coaching or sports psychology, well, those focus on performance execution and performance enhancement, it doesn't mean that the athlete is actually receiving clinical mental health, right, services. And so when we see athletes, they're doing such an incredible job coming out and talking and saying, hey, look, I've been struggling with this. You know, when they come out, they're not talking about mental toughness. They're not, hey, look at all the ways I was so mentally tough right now. They're talking about their mental health, right? I need support and I need help with my mental health, not my mental toughness.
Do you have something to add? I was going to say, this brings me to the next question.
Go for it.
Okay, great. So how can therapy help life after sports? Like how can that help?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, we've already kind of begun thinking about that and talking about that. So maybe I'll just kind of highlight a little bit, you know, what we've said that I think is important. And I think, you know, one of the things that we just want to be mindful of when folks are transitioning out of their sport, they are, you know, to Hannah's point, right? Like, they're losing their community. And part of that community could have been mental health supports. So if they were a college and they were seeking therapy through their, you know, counseling center, or if they are part of a pro team and have access to a sports psychologist who's helping them, you know, work on their performance execution and that kind of a thing. Once that athlete leaves that organization or that college, not only are they leaving all their community, their teammates, their coaches, and all of this, they're also losing access to supports that were available at that point in time. And that can be incredibly disorienting and dysregulating. And that's why I think Hannah and I feel so passionately about filling this gap for treatment. This is where we really want to come in as therapists to say, hey, look, like, now more than ever, you need a therapeutic support. And what we're seeing is that there's a shift in the type of mental health supports that they would need, right? So they're no longer, you know, thinking necessarily about how do I manage my anxiety so I can perform well on the field. It's more of like, okay, now we're going in because we're being confronted with all different types of circumstances, right, that make us question our identities, our friend groups, our goals for the future, right? And so therapy really kind of gives athletes the space to go inward and begin to kind of ask some of these questions, right? Like we were talking about before, right? Who am I without my sport? Or here's a big one that I'm sure all of us have heard, oh, well, now what? Right? Now that you're not doing that anymore, what are you going to do now? Right? Not only are our parents asking us that question, or our coaches or our teammates or a friend or whatever, we're asking ourselves that question, right? Okay, well, now what do I do? And I think this is a really big one. And this is where therapy becomes so helpful. It kind of is making me think about a client that I was having a conversation with recently, and they're facing their retirement in a sport that they've been doing for literally a majority of their life. And they said to me, I just wish somebody would ask me how I'm doing with all of this. And I was like, wow, yeah, that's what I'm here for. Let's ask, how are you doing? And so in a lot of ways, it's the therapist's job to engage the athletes in conversations, to explore who they are as athletes and who they are as people, right? And we do this by helping them identify different interests or value systems that are going on for them, and we ask the questions and we listen. Okay, what is it that they're placing their value in? How can we help them see that, what they learned in their sport is also applicable here? Or what kinds of things were established in sport that are not applicable, right? Because we were talking earlier about how, there are some qualities that we develop as athletes that are, make us incredibly successful people outside of our sport. But there's also these narratives, right? Like go big or go home, or if you're not first, you're last, or no pain, no gain, right? I mean, these are narratives that we digest and we come out on the other side and realize these don't always translate, right? And so it's a therapist's job to kind of say, all right, let's step back a little bit. And we become a safe space for athletes to really kind of muse, who are you? Who were you? Who do you want to be? So, yeah.
I think on a practical level too, just structure. Like if you're someone who has been, doing 2 practices a day, 6 days a week, and then, or games on every single weekend, depending on the sport, like, I know softball does like 5 games a weekend or something absurd, like, to not have that structure. And Samuel, you kind of talked about this before with going right into med school and seeking out that structure. I think having therapy does provide structure. It's something to do each week. It's a touch point. It's a time to check in with yourself and be like, am I actually okay? Or am I just staying busy because I'm not okay? Which a lot of athletes tend to do. So I think like also just giving yourself that space to be like, am I okay? I don't actually even know. And maybe I need someone to ask me that question and check in with me is so hugely important.
Yeah, that definitely is exactly.
And I think,
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Please.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's pretty much exactly what I was saying earlier is like that structure, I think is really helpful. Maybe not only for myself, but also for other people too. That touch point during the week would be probably pretty good. And I mean, in some ways, med school obviously helped me with retaining some structure. But in some ways, I feel like it also hurt me too, because it kind of locked me into that, go to class and then now what do I do? And then, like you mentioned too, baseball is one of those sports where we play 3 games a weekend. We play Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then now my weekends are completely free. And I don't have class. I don't have anything to do. And so it's a completely different feeling.
Yeah, I think the other really important and interesting thing is, I don't know if anyone's read Fast Girl by Susie Favor Hamilton, but it's this really interesting book of Susie Favor Hamilton, who's an Olympic runner, and she goes to the Olympics, gets a medal, comes home, becomes like the #1 call girl in Las Vegas and finds out that she has bipolar disorder. And it's basically talking about how her sport housed her mental illness for so long. And to not have it, she just needed something else to dedicate herself to. And so I think, Samuel, you're kind of coming on a version of this of like athletes, if you don't check in with yourself, you're just going to keep finding that structure elsewhere. And it has the likelihood of becoming very maladaptive. And so if you're not kind of taking the initiative to say, I'm leaving my sport and I don't really know what I'm doing with myself right now, and I should probably check in with that, you can find yourself in a really bad spot because you're following the athlete way, which is all in. And all in, unfortunately, doesn't always work in the real world. I think as athletes, we've all gotten incredible executive functioning skills, and we're really dedicated people. And there's a flip side to that that can sometimes be really scary and detrimental. That's important to check in with yourself on.
Yeah. And I think in a lot of ways too, right? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think I called before.
Yeah, I mean, we're like so passionate about this, you know. I think, well, no, I mean, I think, right, never underestimate the power of being heard either, right? And as we were talking about before, as we all have these, you know, kind of individual experiences, in a lot of ways, it's a collective experience, but inside the collective experience of retirement or graduation or injury are these individual stories. Right? We all have these stories, right? So, you know, we never can underestimate the power of sitting with somebody, and their job, like their entire purpose, right, is just to listen to that story and to hold that story for you and with you. And that's what therapy can be, you know?
I agree. I'll say that, like, Hannah, you mentioned something about like how sometimes we like to like stay busy. And that was something that I learned about myself with always trying to be, you know, on the move. And I had a job where I was traveling every single week. And it's interesting how you're able to disguise certain things and really not be able to see it until you sit still and you aren't traveling, you aren't doing this, and you're realizing like, wow, I may need to talk to someone.
Yeah.
Because I'm not okay. And the thing is, I've realized it's okay to say you're not okay. It's okay.
Yes.
We go, as humans, we go through so many different things. Everyone has their own story, but it's okay to not be okay, and to seek out help, and to listen, to have someone listen to you. Maybe that's the only opportunity. Maybe you have friends or family that don't listen to you. Let the therapist be the person that's going to listen to you. And sometimes that can just be life-changing.
Allison, I'm giving her credit for this. So our Instagram account is People Too. And like that was all her. And that's so fundamental to what we do is athletes sometimes kind of forget their people. And I think the people around athletes forget their people, and you're just machines who are supposed to hyper perform. And this whole conversation of transitioning out of sport is kind of remembering you're a person and remembering that these feelings exist and that it's okay to exist. It would be awesome if we lived in a world where they could exist within a sport. I think the fact that right now we don't makes it that much harder when you're outside the sport to then have those feelings and have been told like that's a weakness. And now all of a sudden that's normal and you need to feel that and it's healthy to feel that. And it's just like such a different framework. Then just funnel that into your sport. You'll get stronger for it. And so I think for athletes transitioning out of sports, it's allowing themselves, it's not weakness, but to feel weak, if that's how they framed it to themselves, and that it actually takes a lot of strength to let yourself break down.
Yeah.
Give yourself grace. Like, we're always so hard on ourselves every single second because we want to be the best. Give yourself grace. It's okay to give yourself some
absolutely. All right. So I know we're kind of getting to the end here, kind of closing up. I think the last question we kind of touched on a bunch. It was like resources, tools, you know, to kind of take care of yourself during this process. If you guys have anything to add, that'd be great. But I was going to say too, I think a good way to end would be each of us kind of like saying like one big thing that we took away. I mean, we've talked about so many amazing things. So kind of give you guys a minute to like think about that. One of the things that I've kind of taken away is, you know, transition out of sports is going to be different for everyone, and talking to someone can really help with that. So that'd be my big takeaway.
Should I go next?
Go for it.
I'll go next. Wait, you know, if you guys have anything you want to add about resources and stuff, or I can go next. Either or.
You know, go next, Rachel. Yeah, please.
Great. So biggest takeaway. I learned a lot. I'm so happy that you guys were on here giving that therapist side of you, because I needed it. So I'm taking away just as the audience is. I'm taking some.
Lovely.
But besides that, I think the biggest takeaway that I learned, and I wish I would have done, is had therapy after I transitioned out of sports.
Yeah.
Even though I was kind of going into a different side of sports, just because like that transition is, it's harder than we want to say it is. It is hard. I feel like you kind of like you either land on your feet or you fall flat on your face.
Yeah.
And not to be fearful of, but it just happens. And
Yeah.
for me, I learned like it took something traumatic for me to go to therapy. And sometimes you don't have to wait until that because there's other things that add on to that. So I would say like biggest takeaway is, you know, just giving yourself grace and understanding that sometimes keeping yourself busy or always doing something may be a defense mechanism of you trying to disguise something. And I learned that. So this is just a great conversation and I'm really happy that we had it. So go ahead.
Me too. I mean, I think my biggest takeaway is that we need to have more of these, right? Like, I think that the more we can speak out, the more we can talk about it, the more we can connect with like-minded people, that's how we break the stigma. You know, that's how we break it. And so I think my biggest takeaway was how easy it was to have this conversation, how effortless. And I'm so grateful for everybody being so vulnerable and willing to talk about their experiences and ask some of the questions here. And yeah, let's keep going. This is the beginning.
Yeah, ditto that. I feel like I learned so much from you guys and your experiences, and just getting to hear a firsthand experience of people who were kind of ready to go, but the ways that it still lingers is such an important part of the conversation too, because my specialty is eating disorders. I spoke about a personal experience with eating disorders. A lot of that is still grasping and holding on. And so to hear from people who are like ready, but not ready, and really kind of navigating that and coming to that on your own, I think is also such an important thing and highlights what we've been talking about this whole time of how it's different for everyone. And the more we have these conversations, the more room there will be for that diversity and experience, because right now we're just trying to get people to notice there is an experience. And I'm excited to get to a place where we can say, this might be what it's like for injury. This might be what it's like for graduation. This might be what it's like for when you hold on longer than you meant to, or identity or whatever. And I'm really excited that this conversation is the first step to being able to have more specific conversations in the future.
Yeah, definitely. All right. That was awesome, guys. Thank you guys so much.
That was good. Thank you. That was great.
Thanks.